this is a good place to begin. The other report that he talked about was the Michael Cohen story, which I admit I have not been able to make this into super interesting radio for folks. It's stuff we cover it at Breitbart News, but this is not that interesting or inspiring or significant to me, and I don't really want to continue to play this guy up. He seems like a dirty dog and a rat. Ratting out his own client is sufficiently dramatic. But the bottom line is this president might have committed some light campaign violations that maybe merit a fine. I'm not seeing anything beyond that. And yet we're talking about now not just impeaching him, Dr. G, but literally putting him in prison, the president of the United States in prison, and whether or not we should change laws. Adam Smith calling for, Adam Schiff. I get confused because of the president's hilarious tweet where he referred to him as Adam Schitt, which is now I'm confused over his name. But now he wants to lock up President Trump over this, and we're so far gone on this topic. It's hard to know what actually is important. What do you think is important on this story?
I think that the most important thing is that we have, as you said, if you can make the connection between the payments to Stormy Daniels and the campaign, that's a minor FCC violation that will end up in a fine. A fine much smaller, let me add, than the $375,000 that the Obama campaign had to pay to the government as a fine for their campaign finance infractions. But at the end of the day, look, I'm not a lawyer, but my friend Greg Jarrett of Fox is, and I asked him yesterday, how is it a crime to make a payment with regards to a private NDA contract between two private individuals during an election campaign? He said it isn't. The law is very clear. If the payment to the individual has any secondary or tertiary purpose, such as to protect my reputation, then it has nothing to do with the campaign and cannot be made a legally binding connection to that campaign. So, no, this is all wishful thinking. This is the desperation of the Democrats. The much larger story is related to all of this Russian collusion delusion is the fact that we now know that General Flynn was not Mirandized. He was not warned of his rights when he went in for a meeting that McCabe sold to him as an informal chat with the FBI. And That's how they got him on a process crime. That's the story, Alex.
Yeah, and I've been saying this, Dr. G, but maybe you will be more fluid with some of the details than I've been. But I think General Flynn they made an example of him. I think he's a total victim here. He may have done he fibbed to the vice president, apparently, which is not good, and he lost his job over it. But they've tried to ruin him. They want to ruin his family, and they're trying to make it so that people who aren't incredibly independently wealthy, who can't afford millions of dollars in legal fees, can't enter this administration or perhaps any other Republican administration, because they're going to be investigated until they're utterly broke. I think that was the plan with General Flynn, and I've seen no evidence to the contrary at this point, because it's such a overreaction to what he's done across the board.
With General Flynn, there is that aspect that they want to deter any good people from going into government who aren't independently wealthy or independently powerful. But there's also the backstory. Let's remember that General Flynn was removed from the DIA because he was trying to reform it. He was trying to get the political distortion of intelligence out of the Defense Intelligence Agency. And this was a man who, when he was in government during the Obama administration, spoke the truth about Iran, spoke the truth about how we're not winning the fight against ISIS. This man had to be punished, not only because of what he was doing in uniform, but then when he became associated with the Trump campaign. That's why he was the sacrificial lamb number one, to send a message to everybody else who thought Trump is the solution. You're absolutely right.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about ISIS, because there's been a lot of reports that ISIS is strengthening in certain areas, and in fact is not being taken sufficiently seriously by the American political establishment. Do you accept that, Dr. G, and what's the evidence there?
Look, when you say political establishment, I'm not sure the political establishment writ large takes anything seriously except their own power. When it comes to the administration and the military and Secretary Mattis and his team and John Bolton, absolutely they take it seriously. The survival of ISIS in the region, especially in this one redoubt, this one holdout they still maintain, this small sliver of land, is truly a function of the incompetence and the intransigence of the government of Iraq in Baghdad. We rely upon, we're not a colonial power. We don't go in there and run countries from D.C. We are a nation that assists what is called the host nation. In this case, the Iraqi host nation has not been taking the threat seriously. It remains, how shall I say this delicately, a less than transparent and free of corruption organization. So we have problems with Iraq. That's the last piece of the puzzle. But yes, the administration takes it seriously. Capitol Hill would prefer to talk about, letting as many people into the country as possible and how they're going to impeach the president. So that's the problem in D.C.
Sure is. So let's talk about D.C. momentarily. Oh, by the way, before we do that, how about Afghanistan? Is there any logic to you why we're still in Afghanistan at this point?
Look, the logic to being in Afghanistan hasn't changed since October of 2001. And that's what we need to get our eyes back onto. The only reason that country in Central Asia matters to us is that its territory must never, ever be allowed to be used to mastermind a mass casualty attack back on U.S. soil. That's the only reason we deployed with a few hundred guys in October 01. It's the only reason we should be there now. The good news is the president knows that we have to have a scaling down of our commitment, but the swamp always wants to double down. But the president has absolutely the right instincts on Afghanistan.
Okay, so let's turn back to the government. There's been a lot of talk of the government shutdown. I think most of this audience would be okay with it, see how it goes, because they know a lot of it is media hype. But the media hype is not insignificant because I think the president did a great job on Monday with Chuck and Nancy, but he's not in a great negotiating position because he's asking for something specific, which is wall funding. He's asking for a very reasonable amount, which is $5 billion, not the $25 billion that the rest of us want him to ask for. And they don't want to give it to him, and they want the status quo, which gives them the upper hand in terms of a negotiation. So so do you think the government shuts down? If it does, again, I know I'm using the left's language here. It's not really it's an extremely partial government shutdown for portions of the government, non-essential employees, many of whom probably shouldn't be getting paid anyway. But Dr. G, game it out with us. What are the options here, and do you have a prediction of what happens?
Look, I hope it shuts down. It's always much nicer to drive into work in D.C. when there's a government shutdown. If the founding fathers thought that we'd have non-essential people in the federal government, I'm not sure they would have fought in 1776 against the British. Why do we have non-essential employees anyway? And they're the only people who don't go to work, and it's only about 20% of the federal government. Look, I think the way to play it is the way we played it last time, and the president absolutely won. It's all, you know what you're the editor of Breitbart. You know what it's about, Alex. It's about narrative. It's about how you present it. And last time, why was it good for the president? Because at the end of the day, it was sold for what it really was. The Democrats were on the side of illegal aliens. And we, the MAGA guys and the president, were on the side of the armed forces. They wanted to protect illegal aliens, sanctuary cities, and cut funding for our armed forces. That is not a winning narrative for the Democrats. We have to have a similar narrative today. I thought the Monday meeting was superb. You really saw Nancy and Chuck show themselves for who they are when they tried to get rid of the press, the incoherent babbling of Nancy, the arrogance of Schumer, who refused to look the president in the eye. It's like Ocasio-Cortez and Ted Lieu, when Ocasio-Cortez says she wants to use her subpoena power to attack, to punish Don Jr., the president's son, because she was embarrassed by him on Twitter. And when Ted Lieu comes out yesterday in a live interview saying, I would like to be able to limit everyone's First Amendment rights. This is, they're doubling down. This is why the next 2 years is going to be even worse than we expected it to be, because they're letting out their inner totalitarian.
Yeah, and we should play that clip, hopefully, next segment there, Producer Paul, the Ted Lieu from California, Democrat, who covered a lot of Breitbart, saying that he would like to actually regulate speech, acknowledging it's better in the long run, but he's tempted to do it. And this is the point, Dr. G, that I opened the show talking about how I think the coup is on. I think it's happening. I think we could very well be in the middle of it. And there's a lot of softening of our belly, trying to weaken our resolve that's taking place right now, trying to demoralize and to win a war of attrition between the MAGA movement and really everyone else. And the Republican political establishment is largely, I think, on the side of the Democrats and the media on this one too, because I think they're part of it. And this is all of this is about making us not want to fight. I think part of this is because it's so demoralizing on so many levels. And I think that hopefully it backfires. Hopefully it gets people fired up. It keeps people fired up. But I'm very concerned about when you're starting to talk about changing the laws in order to jail the seated president for what? Because he paid off from his own campaign that he funded himself a couple $100,000 for a couple affairs he had prior to being in politics, period, that this light campaign potential violation is a reason to lock him up literally right now. When you're talking like that, we're headed to a dark place if we're not already there.
No, I agree. Absolutely. They're not reining themselves in. And the point I've made before, it bears thinking about, who's going to be the pragmatic Democrat? Who's going to be the Democrat in a position of influence who says, guys, no, this is not what we do. This is not why we were elected. And the base, not the crazies, not the radicals, not the pussy hat wearing crazies. The base isn't going to buy this. They're not going to swallow this. They don't exist. They've gone. There's no pragmatic Democrat in a position of influence. You've got, the Mazie Hironos of the world. You've got the Ocasio-Cortezes, the front people of the party. And that's why I agree. I think, look, we've got to remain happy warriors. We've got to want to fight the fight politically. But the next year is going to get ugly. It's going to get very, very ugly. I think you're right. They're going after the president to take him down by whatever means they can, politically or judicially. And we have to be prepared to protect the MAGA agenda. It's not about the president, but he is the embodiment. He's the person that made the MAGA agenda even possible by winning the election. So, the Breitbart listeners are key to this defensive ring we've got to put around the agenda. It means social media. It means being there. It means talking the truth. And it means not backing down in the face of all the lies. So, yeah, it's going to get ugly for at least the next 12 months.
So, Dr. G, we got about 5 minutes left together, and I got several more topics that I want to get to quickly. First of all, what do you think of an Oval Office address or something like that, where the president walks through what's really happening with our immigration system? I think that it would give him a chance to show how actually empathetic and compassionate his proposed policies are for a lot of people who are involved, the American worker, taking on some of these cartels. A lot of these migrants are actually pawns in a much bigger, more corrupt system. I think he's going to talk to the people and do something extended there and really walk through his logic on some of this stuff. I mean, what do you think?
I think it's a genius idea. I hope Bill Shine is listening. If you had a speech that just concentrated on three issues, number one, how every single illegal immigrant that comes across the border is a threat to the livelihood of the recently arrived legal immigrants and their capacity to feed their children, number one. Who do you care about the most?
Sure.
You care about the vulnerable people already here. Number two, if you look at the women who are trafficked, the rate of sexual assault and rape of underage girls. And then lastly, if you really want to make the emotional argument, of the 12,000 children that are in DHS facilities right now who came across the border illegally, 10,000 of them, Alex, were sent on their journey to America by their parents, given into the hands of the coyotes. If you care about girls, if you care about young women, if you want to protect the children, if you want to protect the jobs of the most vulnerable people in America, build the bloody wall. The president can make that argument in the White House address, and it will take all the wind out of the sails of the Democrats. So I completely agree with you.
Thank you. Dr. Gorka, Why We Fight, Defeating America's Enemies with No Apologies is his book. He was former national security editor at Breitbart and former White House advisor as well, Fox News contributor, etc. You guys know the drill. He's got a new talk show next year. We'll talk to him about that when the time is right. Two more quick ones. Jamal Khashoggi, Time Magazine Person of the Year. This is inevitable. I said prior to the announcement that they should give it to him 5 times because I said that they should give it to 5 people. They should all be Jamal Khashoggi. Ignoring the 20 journalists killed in Mexico almost entirely this year. They got a passing reference in the article. But Jamal Khashoggi, as we talked about, a Muslim Brotherhood guy connected to the bin Laden family, not an American citizen. I think that this was pretty embarrassing for Time to go this route, but I want your thoughts.
Yeah, 2 questions. Alex, did they ever put Daniel Pearl on the cover of Time as Man of the Year?
A good question. I'm going to guess no, though I admit I'm a bit ignorant.
Question. How many people read Time? I mean, does anybody read Time anymore?
I don't think so. Not in many years. I don't think this country's cared about Time.
And lastly, when Christian Amanpour tweeted yesterday with the cover of Time, "We are all Khashoggi," my response was, "No, Christine, we are not all members of the Muslim Brotherhood who are lobbyists for theocracy in the Middle East." It just tells you everything about them, and just the lack of self-awareness is so monumental. It's quite amusing, really.
Yes. Okay, good. And so you and I are on the same page there. And last one for today, this Strasbourg terror attack, suspect yelled Allahu Akbar. I think 3 people killed. He had 27 prior criminal convictions. And this is a big deal, folks, because there's a lot of terror that is ISIS and other Islamic terrorists really do believe in a lot of symbolism, and attacking around the holidays is a commonality here. But I want to get your thoughts here, Dr. G.
So think about what kind of 27 convictions by his 29th birthday, and they don't realize this man is a problem. When he converts, when he radicalizes in prison in 2013, the mere fact alone that the authorities in France say he is one of maybe 12,000 what they call jihadi criminals, 4,000 of whom are serious terror threats. That tells you everything you need to know about how a member of the Judeo-Christian culture can lose the war against the next totalitarian threat. So sadly, expect more. If you're on holiday in Europe, always watch your six, have your head on a stick, as the law enforcement says, and be aware, as you're absolutely right. Symbolic targets are incredibly important to these guys. And this is why, for example, we need to build the wall.
Yeah, and the president correctly uses as an example for building the wall, because this is the prior convictions. It just really gets me. And I just hate reading these stories over and over again where folks who had already been deported 8 times commit some sort of a crime, sometimes even a murder. I mean, it just shows you how preventable it is with a sane immigration system. And the level of just a lack of moral clarity that we don't have this stuff sorted out, that it isn't priority number 1 for every politician in Washington, to me, is just stunning.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you don't have national security, what do you have? You can't talk about economic growth. You can't talk about education. You can't talk about the health system. Job number 1 of any president, any head of state, is to secure the safety of his citizens. And, you know, it's in my book, Why We Fight. Proudest moment for me in the White House is when the president stood in the Rose Garden regards to the Paris Treaty and said, I was elected by the citizens of Pittsburgh and Paris. So if there's somebody that understands that priority, it's the current incumbent President Trump.
All right, we got to run. Dr. G, great stuff, my friend. Talk to you next week.
Thank you, Alex. God bless. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you as well.